Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2021 and welcome to your race review here in Imola for the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. Round 2 of the 2021 season certainly didn't disappoint, and if you enjoyed round 1 in Bahrain, I've got a funny feeling you will have enjoyed today's race as well. So as always, spoiler warning for today's Grand Prix. If you didn't see it, I would very much recommend you go and watch the highlights and then come back over here to enjoy our race rundown. But as always, if you are new, feel free to subscribe. And before we jump into our results, let's take a quick look at your grid from yesterday's qualifying session. Claiming his 99th pole position in Formula 1 history, Lewis Hamilton lined up alongside Sergio Perez for his first front row start in Formula 1 history. A mistake from Max Verstappen would see him line up alongside Charles Leclerc with Gasly at P5. It was the two McLarens, Danny Rick and Lando Norris 6th and 7th. Bottas, a big disappointment on Saturday, P8 would start today's race. Ocon 9th and Lance Stroll at your top 10. A disappointing day for Carlos Sainz would see the Spaniard start P11, but a great day for the two Williams drivers, 12th and 14th for Russell and Latifi. Sebastian Vettel slotted in between the two of them. Alonso almost out in Q1, but not quite, started P15. The two Alphas of Raikkonen and Giovinazzi, 16th and 17th. The two Haas cars of Schumacher and Mazepin, 18th and 19th. And crashing out in Q1, Yuki Tsunoda would start P20. Sebastian Vettel would start today's race in the pit lane, and before we even got going, the heavens opened. Carnage everywhere, but your race result for today's Grand Prix looked a little bit like this. Claiming his 11th victory in Formula 1 history, Max Verstappen was victorious, Lewis Hamilton P2. A 1-2. We were probably expecting after last weekend's race, but how we got there was nothing like any of us would have expected. A fantastic Grand Prix capped off by a Mclaren podium, Norris P3, his second in Formula 1 history. A great drive from the British driver. Also fantastic drives from both Ferrari drivers, 4th and 5th. You don't usually say that's a great result for Ferrari, but in the context of last season, from the context of the drives today, really good job from both of those. A quiet day for Daniel Ricciardo, but points again in his McLaren career in P6, but certainly a different story with Pierre Gasly, started 5th. A different strategy in the opening stages, starting on the wet tyres, but an incredible comeback saw the Frenchman finish P8, but past the checkered flag, Lance Stroll handed a 5-second penalty for a move earlier on Pierre Gasly. It was Raikkonen that finished P9, but a post-race 30-second penalty for a safety car infringement sees Ocon P9 and Fernando Alonso P10. Sergio Perez finished today's race in P11. Such a great Saturday, fell apart on so many occasions on Sunday, finding himself working his way through the gravel on multiple occasions. A 10-second penalty through the early safety car. Things never really went his way. No points in his second race for Red Bull. Yuki Tsunoda, a mixed bag of a day, finishing P12, a good recovery drive after Saturday's incidents, but a penalty for exceeding track limits, also a spin of his own. We'll talk about the Japanese driver a little bit later on. The two Alfa Romeos were 13th and 14th, a difficult day for both drivers, hit with penalties and a brake issue for Antonio Giovinazzi. Vettel 15th, retiring from the race. Schumacher and Mazepin 16th and 17th, and your DNFs. Valtteri Bottas, George Russell, both of them making contact. Our big story of the day we'll talk about in a moment's time, and Nicholas Latifi retiring from the race on lap 1 in P20. But with your results now out of the way, we'll move over to our race debrief. So much to talk about in today's race, but the fight at the front once again well and truly on. Verstappen versus Hamilton. Max had time to make up after his mistake in qualifying and straight away got to work on it, overtaking not only Sergio Perez but also Lewis Hamilton into turn 1. A forceful move, definitely on the edge, forcing Hamilton as wide as he could, practically off the circuit, contact between the pair, a little bit of damage to Hamilton, Verstappen through in what can only be described as a textbook hard racing overtake. And then, from there on out, almost seemed to control the entirety of the Grand Prix. After our red flag incident, Verstappen, who had led the race for every single lap up until that point, a slight mistake almost saw the Flying Dutchman into the gravel, but thankfully things got going again. Was a little bit lucky that Charles Leclerc didn't have radio, thought it was a standing start, but actually it was a safety car start, so did get caught out by that a little bit. However, Verstappen, after that, was in complete control. A great race from Max today, sees him 1 point off the championship lead, but on the other half of the Red Bull garage, things not so rosy. Perez losing that position before we even got to turn 1 to Max Verstappen. Later on in the lap, made a mistake and lost out to Charles Leclerc. Behind the safety car, went into the gravel, lost positions to Danny Rick and Gasly, overtook under the safety car, and ultimately paid the price for the 10-second penalty. After the red flag, things were looking a little bit more rosy for Checo. He'd done his penalty, 4th place. Surely he'd be in the mix for a podium, but a big spin down at turn 5 saw him charging into the gravel. Points pretty much a no-go from there on out. A difficult day in his second race. But perhaps the team with all the biggest talking points from today, Mercedes. It's a second place and fastest lap for Lewis Hamilton, which means he holds on to the World Championship lead. But boy, was it a chaotic one to get there. Losing out to Max in turn 1, not ideal. Losing a bit of front wing, not ideal. But as the intermediate tyres started to wear out, started to turn into those slick tyres, which the modern Pirellis do, something I'm not a huge fan of, to be honest. But nevertheless, Hamilton started to close in on Max Verstappen. The pit stop phase was crucial for Hamilton to potentially do the undercut. Ended up being the overcut going 1 lap later on his pit stop compared to Max. But a mistake on the front right tyre saw him come out about 4 seconds behind Verstappen. And just as Lewis fans probably thought things weren't going his way today, a bit of confusion behind blue flags, overtaking George Russell down the inside of Tamburello. Hamilton off into the gravel, hitting the wall. Very, very lucky to still be in the race. Ultimately reversing back out, something he was totally able to do. I've seen a few murmurings that that's illegal reversing. It's only illegal reversing in the pit lane. And in terms of an unsafe release, yellow flags everywhere. His team were on the radio. All good, all clear. Hamilton, though, with a lot to do, a lot of work to do, with a damaged front wing, still in the point at this stage, but nowhere near the race lead. The red flag, though, came at a perfect time for Lewis Hamilton, but not his teammate, Valtteri Bottas, who had been having a stinker of a race up until this point, losing positions on the opening lap. I said yesterday what a great opportunity it was, starting in 8th place. Today, Valtteri had the chance to prove to Mercedes he can overtake. When things don't go his way on Saturday, he can make up for it on Sunday. What ended up happening was Valtteri stuck in this midfield train and got to a stage where he was battling with George Russell. And actually, when Hamilton overtook Russell from the blue flag, and though it wasn't the best place for Russell to get out of the way, he was running his own race. And Russell did nothing wrong, he was just letting Hamilton through. So no blame at Russell's door there, because Russell was in a fight for Bottas for 9th place. Crazy. In a season where Mercedes are looking for the title, Williams are looking for points, no way should Bottas be anywhere near that fight. And then we get to the incident, the huge crash, the red flag incident in today's Grand Prix. Russell trying to go around the outside of Bottas into turn 1. Bottas starts to slightly move to the right. Russell's right-hand tyres just dip into the grass, spinning the car round, the grass still wet from earlier on. Contact, both of them out on the spot. I think this is a racing incident. Of course, this is going to be a big topic of conversation and debate, so let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. There is no doubt, especially when you look at the onboards from Kimi Räikkönen, which I think is the best camera angle to use in this incident. Bottas clearly is defending on the left, on the inside of the corner, But when Russell starts to get alongside, starts to move to the right slightly, hugging that racing line a little bit more, starting to move Russell onto the grass. The reason, however, I think it's a racing incident is that there was still enough room for two cars there. Russell didn't have to go on the grass, there was still plenty of tarmac between the two of them, hence it was a racing incident. I'm not a huge fan of some of the comments that have come out after the race, especially from Valtteri Bottas, who said it was a crazy move, he should never have gone for it. For me, that certainly wasn't the case. It was a perfectly fine move, the best place on the track to overtake. Both of them got it a little bit wrong, and it's ended up in a huge incident. The halo did wonders today, not only for Russell, not only for Bottas, but also Schumacher and Raikkonen that were coming along behind. But a day to forget for both of them, who of course are fighting, duelling it out this season for that Mercedes seat. But not ideal, especially for Russell, who very easily could have scored Williams' first points today in a very long time. But from Mercedes' point of view, not ideal at all in a championship context. But what this did allow was Hamilton to have the comeback of his life. Got in the pit lane, was able to just about stay in the points. I think it was 8th place where he came out. Fresh car, fresh tyres, attack, attack, attack. And that's exactly what he did in those closing stages. Was the big storyline, fighting his way back up through the field, ending the race in P2. Say what you like about Lewis Hamilton, but so many drivers would have given up after hitting the barriers, and fair play to him to just keep on going, to just keep on trying. The car was there, and even though his teammate Bottas got stuck in the midfield, no such issues for Lewis Hamilton. A great recovery. Shouldn't have made the mistake in the first place, but this is what separates real champions from those that don't quite make it. The consistency of Hamilton, unmatched in Formula 1. And days like today, especially when we get to the end of the season, will make the difference in this championship challenge, where Red Bull definitely have a car to win. And this race, more than anything, has proved we've got a championship challenge on our hands. A little bit further back, let's get through some more of these teams, because obviously the big talking point was at the front, but another great fight in the midfield from McLaren and Ferrari. Norris getting his second podium, and what a race he had. He was caught up with Lance Stroll on the opening lap. No footage of that just yet, so I'm not 100% sure how much damage he would have been carrying, but not a lot from all accounts. Moved down to 9th place and set his sights on fighting his way back through the field. A double overtake down towards turn 1 on Stroll and Gasly it was at the time. Overtook Daniel Ricciardo through team orders, and Danny Rick, who had a quiet race today similar to yesterday, he's still getting up to pace in this new car. And all of those drivers that are moving to these new teams, you've got to give them a little bit of time to get used to a brand new concept of car, a brand new surrounding and a brand new team. So Danny Rick, I'll cut him some slack, and scoring points again today is pretty much the best he can be doing at the moment. But that didn't stop Lando. His charge through the field continued, and on the restart, overtook Charles Leclerc for what at the time was P2. On the soft tyres, a great call from McLaren. I did wonder, probably a little bit silly of me, but I did wonder, could he challenge Verstappen? Not quite, was the answer. And I think this really portrayed that Red Bull and Mercedes are going to be in a league of their own this year. And on occasion, McLaren may be able to challenge, maybe Ferrari as well, but there's definitely still a gap between those top two and midfield. But Norris held his own, and when Hamilton came knocking, though commentary said Norris would just let him through, he didn't. And some great defending, great positioning of his car, almost held on to P2, but not quite. 3 laps to go, Hamilton through, but a great drive from Norris, one of his best in Formula 1, earning his second podium in Formula 1. Awesome stuff from Nozza. Ferrari, I said earlier, a great race. 4th and 5th, it's still strange to say a great race for Ferrari. A team that want wins, they want podiums, and there was a chance of getting a podium today. Leclerc not having radio for the whole second half of the race, so after the red flag Leclerc had no radio, would have played a huge part in not getting that podium. And they'll be kicking themselves because of that. But nevertheless, a great drive from Charles. No radio, still getting 4th place, and actually, through those treacherous conditions, he drove a really strong race. great weekend for him. For Sainz, he wasn't too happy with the first half, went into the gravel on more than one occasion, but still coming away with P5. His best result for Ferrari, not too far away from a podium either. They can be really, really happy with that. Mega improvements from last year. That's the main thing for them. Just trying to make sure last year's blushes are saved a little bit in 2021. They're moving in the right direction. So Ferrari fans, it's not that podium just yet, but I think they're going to be there or thereabouts over the course of this year, and they will be able to pick up a podium or two if we are judging things from the pace today. Gasly ended up P7. Crikey, what a roller coaster of a race for him, starting on the wet tyres. A gamble I don't feel they needed to do. Starting in 5th place, they knew they had a quick car here, but very easily, things could have gone the other way. It could have got wetter, and I could be here looking very, very silly. Dropped almost to the back of the grid, and a great comeback sees him finish in the points. We got used to it last year. Mega drives from Gasly, overtakes galore when things aren't looking great, still manages to claw it back, and that's exactly what he did today. However, teammate Tsunoda, who was having a great comeback, things got a little bit scrappy at the end. A 5-second penalty for track limits, partnered with a little spin on the restart as well while fighting with Lewis Hamilton, of all people. Shows his inexperience, a rookie mistake, but he's allowed to do that. And though AlphaTauri will probably come away from this weekend frustrated, they've only got 7th place, 6 points, that's not really too bad. In front of rivals Alpine, in front of rivals Aston Martin, they'll take it. For Lance Stroll, he got that 5-second penalty that demoted him from 7th to 8th, but what he is showing again this year, well, more than ever, is a bit of consistency. Q3 in both races, points in both races, and whilst the team continues to kick up a fuss about the regulations and how it doesn't suit their car and how it's unfair, nothing's going to change with that. And Stroll, who is more than aware of that, is getting the job done on track. And fair play to him, a driver that gets a lot of criticism, rightly so sometimes, others not so rightly so. So far in 2021, he's doing alright. For Sebastian Vettel, it's really hard to judge, because anything that could have gone wrong for him today practically did. Both cars, including Stroll, brakes catching fire before we even got going. Vettel had a penalty later on for not having his tyres on properly before the start, a pit lane start, just everything for Seb today. It was just a mess. But what was better and nicer to see was him getting his elbows out when he needed to. Some great fights in the midfield early doors. A little bit too aggressive perhaps with Sergio Perez while defending midway through the race. But it's nice to see that feisty side of Seb is still there and he still does want to fight. Alpine, first points of the season for both drivers. I think a really solid race from Esteban Ocon. He needed this. He needed to prove he was the team leader for now. And I think he did that this weekend. Through to Q3, 2 points after starting on the wet tyres as well and had to swap early doors. Coming back from that and putting in a solid performance, fair play. Fernando Alonso, a weekend to forget I think. Like Sebastian Vettel, anything that could have gone wrong for Fernando pretty much did. We didn't see a lot of him, but when we did, it usually wasn't good. Spinning in the gravel, in the wall, on the way to the formation lap. Not ideal. But like I've said, with all the drivers that have moved teams, I mentioned it earlier on, and I'll say it again, we need to give him a little bit of time. Fernando is no slouch. We saw in Bahrain, he still has the speed, but a weekend to forget for the two-time world champion. Alfa Romeo, what could have been? Raikkonen in the points, but a safety car infringement got handed a 30-second penalty. Crikey, that is a hefty penalty. Not quite sure what he's done to get this penalty as of yet. There's been very little information. I'm sure it will come out once I finish recording. That's the sod's law of Formula 1. But with Gio having to come in with about 4 or 5 laps to go because of a braking issue, something got caught in there. He missed out on points as well. Once again, for the second weekend in a row, so close, yet so far for Alfa Romeo. But once again, that car is better this year. It's improving, and that's the main thing. For Williams, we spoke about George Russell earlier on and what a great race he was having up until that racing incident with Valtteri Bottas. And for Latifi, I felt bad for old Nicholas today. His best ever quali. A difficult start-ish, not terrible, but not fantastic. End of the lap, spins it into the gravel, lucky to get going, but nevertheless, gets going again. Hits Nikita Mazepin, doesn't see him, I think, in his wing mirror, doesn't maybe look at all the way he comes across. I don't think he realises he's there, might have been the spray of the car, ends up in the barrier, out on lap 1, and poor old Nicky, who just sometimes can't seem to catch a break, what was looking like it could be his best weekend in F1 history, ends in misery, P20 and a DNF. And for Haas, once again there's crunches, once again there's spins. They've got 2 rookies. It's to be expected, I'm sure, after having the dynamic duo of Grosjean and Magnussen. I'm sure they didn't think their rookies would crash quite as much as they are at the moment. Mazepin was lucky to be in the race after lap 1 contact with Latifi, had a spin late on himself and ended up a minute behind Schumacher. His pace just isn't there at the moment. Whereas Mick Schumacher really impressed me this weekend. Yes, lost it under the safety car early on. Yes, it's something Grosjean did, I know, as a Grosjean fan. But these mistakes happen. For these 2 drivers and Tsunoda, this year is more about learning, getting the grips of Formula 1 and having their first wet race under wet conditions is going to be a bit of a challenge for any driver. So fair play to all of them for making the checkered flag. And that Haas car we know isn't great this year. And so what's more important for them really is finishing races, getting that experience and learning the world of Formula 1. And before we go, let's take a quick look at your driver of the day and race rating. Yesterday, I gave my qualifying driver of the day to Mr. George Russell, Mr. Saturday, P12 for Williams, but come race day, it had to be. It was the fan vote, and for once, I agree with you. Lando Norris, faultless today, 7th on the grid, his 2nd career podium. I spoke about it earlier. So composed in the fight with Lewis Hamilton. Some great overtakes and battling throughout. Fair play to Lando Norris. But my driver of the weekend, I've given to Charles Leclerc. 4th in qualifying, 4th in the race. But with those issues, communication issues at the end of the race, didn't make any mistakes. Also was one of the few drivers with Norris in the race to make no mistakes at all, and in qualifying did a pretty good job. Norris unlucky with his track limits. Leclerc for me, driver of the weekend, but let me know yours in the comment section down below. And another great race in 2021. Perhaps I've been a bit harsh. I've gone with 8 out of 10 for the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, pushing 9, and judging some of the races I've given a 7 to in the past. This is much better than those, but with 2 incredible races to start the season, I've got a good feeling about the rest of the year. But that's it from me. That's it from Imola. We'll be back in 2 weekends' time for Portimao as we return to Portugal. Hamilton, 1 point in front of Verstappen. Who will be champion? Let me know your thoughts about this weekend's race in the comment section down below. If you are new, feel free to subscribe, and I hope to see you all in the next one.